Hello, my name is Maria Dawson. I'm 72, and this past Christmas, as the snow fell quietly outside, my son locked the door behind me and told me I was no longer part of the family. No yelling, no second chances, just silence and a door that wouldn't open. You think you're prepared for loneliness when you grow old, but nothing prepares you for being erased by your own child. Let me tell you how it happened and why I didn't cry that night. Tea's gone cold, Maria murmured to herself. But she hadn't taken a sip. Outside, the wind crept through the seams of the windows, brushing against the curtains like ghostly fingers. In the stillness of the morning, a faint thud came from upstairs, the kind of sound that meant someone was home, but not necessarily present. The kind of sound that reminded Maria of her place in this house, heard perhaps, but not seen. She sat at the far end of the dining table, a space once reserved for grandparents and laughter. Now, it was merely where the extra chair landed. The large oak table gleamed under the pale light, but only one placemat had been laid. The kitchen behind her hummed. Sarah had turned on the microwave to reheat something from last night. Maria's hand hovered over the porcelain teacup. It was her favourite. White, with a delicate green vine along the rim. A wedding gift, decades ago. She still remembered how warm it felt when her husband poured her the first cup. "Mum, you really should use a plastic cup," Sarah called from the counter, not turning. "That china is so fragile. If it breaks, you might hurt yourself." Maria didn't answer. She traced the handle with her thumb, then folded both hands in her lap. The tea continued to cool. David walked into the room, half-dressed, scrolling on his phone. "Honey, don't forget. Mum has that checkup at St. Vincent's this afternoon. Ask if they still give out those senior vouchers." He kissed Sarah's cheek distractedly, then disappeared into the hallway without acknowledging Maria. A silence followed, interrupted only by the ding of the microwave. Sarah plated the reheated casserole and set it aside. She poured herself coffee, but left Maria's cup untouched. Maria glanced toward the hallway where David had gone, then turned to look at the framed photograph above the mantel. The family reunion from 10 years ago. Everyone smiling. She remembered the heat of that day, the effort of gathering everyone. In the photo, David had his arm around her shoulder. Sarah stood beside him, Lily still a toddler between them. Maria's eyes lingered on the image. In it, she belonged. The present-day voices pulled her back. Sarah's phone rang. "Hi, yeah," Sarah answered casually. She lowered her voice only slightly. "Mm-hmm." "No, she's still kicking." "Yeah, I know, right? Honestly, it's a miracle. But hey, at least the house is in David's name. No nursing home bills for us." The words struck like cold water. Maria blinked. Her hands didn't move. She stared at the steamless tea. She rose slowly, her knees stiff but steady. She walked to the sink and poured the tea out in silence. The clatter of ceramic against porcelain rang louder than intended. Sarah glanced over. "Everything okay?" Maria turned to face her. "Tea's cold," she said evenly. She rinsed the cup gently and set it in the dish rack. The water still ran. Sarah's phone call resumed in the background, light laughter echoing down the hall. Maria walked back to the table. She sat down again this time, folding her hands more tightly, as though they needed something to hold on to. Her gaze returned to the family photo. This time she noticed something she hadn't before in the picture. Her eyes weren't looking at the camera. They were off to the side, caught in the act of watching, not participating. The upstairs footsteps began again. A creak, a sigh, a drawer closing. Maria placed her teacup back on its saucer. Her fingers trembled slightly, but her eyes were steadier than they had been in years. The door to her room was always left open, not because she liked it that way, but because no one ever bothered to close it. Maria stood beside her narrow bed, adjusting the creases in the blanket until they were straight. Her fingers, still nimble despite the ache in her knuckles, smoothed the corners one last time. It was a modest space, barely wide enough for the bed and a small desk. David's old school desk, its surface scarred with pencil marks from a childhood long gone. A bookshelf leaned against one wall, nearly empty, except for a few donated paperbacks and a ceramic angel figurine someone had left behind. The room shared a thin wall with the storage closet. Sometimes at night, Maria could hear boxes shifting when someone rummaged for old holiday decorations or misplaced receipts. That morning, the cold lingered. The radiator in her room had coughed to life, then given up again. She wrapped a shawl over her shoulders, the one with faded embroidery her mother had stitched decades ago. The midday sun filtered through the sheer curtains, casting a pale light over the faded rug. A knock at the door, gentle, then followed by the creak of hinges. Linda's familiar face appeared in the frame, rosy-cheeked from the cold, holding a pie dish wrapped in a tea towel. "Hi there, Maria." Linda smiled warmly. "Baked too much again. Thought I'd bring you some of the apple pie before it goes to waste." Maria smiled genuinely. "That's very kind of you. Come in if you don't mind the mess." "There's hardly a mess," Linda said, stepping inside. But her gaze lingered. She scanned the small room, noting the repurposed furniture, the lack of personal touches. Her smile faltered just a moment. "Your son, is he home?" Maria nodded. "Upstairs. Working, I believe." There was a pause. Linda didn't pry further. Instead, she handed Maria the warm dish. The scent of cinnamon and baked apples filled the room, briefly making it feel alive. Footsteps approached. Sarah appeared at the door, her face brightening when she saw Linda. "Oh, Linda. That smells wonderful. Thank you." "Just a little something for Maria, Linda," said, offering a polite smile. Sarah stepped into the room. "You're always so generous. We've been meaning to have you over sometime." Maybe next week. Maria watched them talk, standing quietly beside her bed. Sarah's hand rested lightly on Linda's arm as they walked back toward the hallway. From behind, Sarah's tone cooled. As Linda gathered her coat at the door, she turned once more to Maria. "I'll come by again soon. Maybe we can have some tea together." Maria smiled again, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I'd like that." After the door shut behind her, Sarah turned with a different voice. "Mum, it's best not to talk too much about personal things. People can misunderstand. They tend to gossip." Maria met her eyes. "I didn't say anything. I know. Just a reminder," Sarah replied lightly, then walked away. Left alone once more, Maria returned to her room. She placed the pie gently on the desk and sat. Her gaze swept across the small space resting on the drawer beneath the desk's writing surface. It was slightly ajar. She leaned forward. The drawer that had always been aligned now sat crooked, as if someone had pulled it open and hastily shoved it back. Her fingers reached in. The notebook inside her journal was off-center. She had placed it beneath an old scarf, but now it was on top. She opened it. Nothing was missing. But the last page had a faint smudge, as though touched by a hand that didn't belong to hers. Maria sat still for a long moment. Her mind didn't race. She didn't panic. Instead, her thoughts moved like quiet water beneath ice. She stood and walked toward the laundry basket in the hallway where clean clothes were waiting to be sorted. Carefully, without a sound, she lifted David's jeans. From the back pocket, something metallic peeked out. A key. Her fingers closed around it slowly, firmly. She slipped it into her pocket, her hand calm. Her eyes did not tremble. Only her breath did briefly. She slipped the key from David's drawer out of the laundry basket. Her hand didn't shake. Her eyes looked straight ahead. Maria had once sewn a plum-coloured wool dress, but she had never worn it. She unfolded it carefully that morning, holding it up against the dim light that came through her small bedroom window. The fabric was still supple, the seams neat, every stitch made by hand during a winter long gone. She had imagined herself wearing it to something lovely, perhaps a dinner or a recital, or just a quiet holiday gathering where someone might notice the way the colour matched the tone of her skin. But that moment had never come. Over the years, the dress had remained folded at the back of her drawer, waiting for an occasion that never materialized. Today, she thought briefly might be different. She heard Sarah's voice before she saw her bright, laughing, sharp-edged in its delight. "No, look again," Sarah giggled through the phone. "This bag cost me a month of my mother-in-law's pension. Totally worth it." Maria paused at the threshold of her door, the dress draped over her arm. She didn't move forward. The laughter downstairs rolled through the air like perfume, sweet and cloying, made for someone else's senses. She turned back to her room. It was Saturday, and the house was bustling. David's tech company had landed a new client, a major one by the sound of it, and Sarah had thrown together a celebration with catered food and gold foil decorations. The scent of baked brie and truffle oil hung in the air. Everything sparkled, but none of it was Maria's. She had asked gently if she could help set the table. Sarah had smiled thinly. "It's all being handled, Mom. Better if you rest a bit, just so it's not too chaotic downstairs." Maria placed the dress on the bed and walked into the kitchen. A tray of scones she had baked earlier sat untouched beside a glossy white box from the bakery. The difference was stark. Her pastries were uneven but fragrant. The bakeries glistened with sugar glaze and perfection. As she reached for the tray, Sarah passed by her eyes, falling on the dress lying in the doorway. "Is that for tonight?" she asked, laughing lightly. "It's sweet, Mum, but maybe a bit heavy for the theme." Maria didn't reply. She simply returned the tray of scones to the kitchen, then busied herself wiping an already clean counter. Guests arrived, and voices filled the downstairs. Maria stayed out of the way, sitting on the edge of her bed, listening to the rhythms of the party through the thin walls. Every so often, David's voice rose above the rest, delivering a toast, a story, a joke. When she tiptoed down with a plate of her own pastries, the spread had already been set, everything coordinated, colour-matched. Her plate looked out of place. No one reached for it. A few moments later, she found it moved to the sideboard untouched. David found her in the hallway. "Hey, Mum, I told you you should really just relax upstairs. It's packed down here, and we don't want you getting bumped around." "I understand," Maria replied softly. Back in her room, she sat again on the bed. Her eyes drifted to a box tucked behind the nightstand. Inside was a stack of old cards, birthdays, anniversaries, holidays, and a single envelope that read, "Happy Retirement." The card had once been placed on her work desk the day she left the nursing home where she had worked for over 30 years. From her window, she saw Sarah outside holding the card. She had used it, ripped it open, scribbled something on the back. A dinner menu. Later, Maria returned to the bookshelf. She picked up the family photo in its glass frame, the one taken at her 60th birthday. Her hands moved slowly. She opened the back panel and pulled out a small slip of folded paper hidden behind the picture. She unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was her own in firm blue ink, a statement of ownership, titled, "To Maria L. Dawson, year 1998. Maria opened the old photo frame and silently unfolded a slip of paper tucked behind it. It read, Property title, Maria L. Dawson, 1998. I don't need sugar, Maria said. I want to remember the bitterness. The waitress gave a small nod and stepped away, leaving the black coffee steaming in front of her. Maria sat by the window of a modest cafe that looked out toward the frozen trees of Chestnut Park. It was too early for the families with strollers or the joggers with earbuds. The morning was hushed, the kind of silence only winter could afford. Maria pulled a small folder from her handbag and laid it gently on the table. Inside was the document she had removed from the photo frame the night before, its paper faintly yellowed, the ink still legible. Property title, Maria L. Dawson, 1998. Her name had never been removed. Still as clear as day, a man's voice said. Maria looked up to see Robert Galloway, his salt and pepper hair tucked beneath a navy wool cap, setting his briefcase down before slipping into the seat across from her. His coat smelled faintly of tobacco and pine, like an old fireplace lit out of habit more than necessity. Thank you for meeting me on such short notice, Maria said. Robert waved a hand. I owe your husband more than a few mornings. He once drove me across town in a snowstorm to keep me from losing my bar exam. Maria allowed a ghost of a smile. He always hated late fees. They exchanged a moment of quiet respect before getting to business. Robert opened the folder and reviewed the property title. It's still in your name. That's good. No legal transfer to David yet. But they could try to move quickly if they suspected anything. They don't, Maria said. To them, I am ornamental, a piece of furniture with old memories and too many questions. Robert looked up at her more carefully now. You want to draft a new will? I want the house and most of the savings to go to the Rosewood Senior Fund, and I want a small share reserved for Lily, my granddaughter. Robert tapped his pen against the edge of his legal pad. That's going to raise eyebrows. I'm not doing it to hurt them, Maria said, her voice steady. I'm doing it to preserve what's mine and to honor those who still know what love looks like. Would you like the signing to be witnessed and recorded? I would, she replied. If this ends in a court, I want them to hear me say every word. Robert studied her closely for a beat. Maria, are you sure they may challenge this? You're still living in the same house. I'm aware, she said. She sipped her coffee. That's why I'm doing this now quietly, but not secretly. I'm not trying to punish them. I'm only trying to remind them what value means. Her fingers touched the pearl bracelet on her wrist, a piece she hadn't worn in years. It had belonged to her mother, and still carried the faint scent of lavender oil. Through the frosted cafe window, she watched a small dog tug its owner along the sidewalk. The world moved on, even when no one was watching. I've been silent for too long, she continued. They think silence is surrender, but sometimes it's just the beginning of a very clear sentence. Robert leaned back in his chair. That's quite a sentence. She didn't smile. Instead, she slid the folder across to him. Make it official? He nodded. I'll prepare the documents. We'll sign next week. And I'll bring the recorder. The waitress returned, refilling the cup. Maria didn't add anything. No sugar, no cream. The coffee remained dark and untouched, just the way she wanted. Before standing, Robert gathered his notes and looked back at her. Do you want to inform your family in advance? He asked softly. Maria stared into the steam rising from her cup. Her expression remained calm. No, she said. Christmas Eve will be clear enough. Robert asked gently. Do you want to inform your family in advance? Maria answered. No, Christmas Eve will be clear enough. Every year during the last week of December, Maria baked an apple pie, but this year no one asked where the scent was coming from. The aroma wafted through the kitchen quietly, a soft blend of cinnamon clove and browned sugar. It filled the cracks in the cold air, seeping under doors and curling at the foot of the staircase. But no footsteps followed the scent. No voice asked, "Is it ready yet, Mom?" No grandchildren peeked into the oven, giggling, stealing a sliver before it had cooled. Maria wiped flour from her hands and opened her old recipe book. The pages were stained corners, folded from decades of use. The handwriting was hers, firm and careful, from a time when her fingers were more agile and the kitchen more alive. Outside, the wind rattled the window panes. Snow dusted the edge of the herb garden, long dead for the season. It was December 23rd. She kneaded the dough patiently, her rhythm slow but sure. The oven clicked warm behind her, a low hum offering companionship where conversation had gone silent. The house otherwise was quiet. David had left early for a video conference. He barely looked up from his phone as he grabbed his coat. "We've got final calls with the European clients. Don't wait up for dinner," he'd said already halfway out the door. Sarah was upstairs. Maria could hear the faint buzz of a hairdryer, and later the crisp sound of hangers sliding as she decided what to wear to the office party. Maria rolled the crust, pressed it into the dish, and layered the apples just as she always had. Thinly sliced, soaked briefly in lemon juice, tossed with sugar and spice. Her hands moved from memory, not measurement. As the pie baked, she sat down in the kitchen and let the warmth soak into her palms. The scent reminded her of when her husband was still alive. He would sit at the edge of the counter with a newspaper, pretending not to sneak extra slices of apple while she worked. David, a boy, then would dangle his feet from the stool and ask if he could help. Those memories were still intact. They lived quietly behind her eyes. The timer rang. Maria removed the pie, placing it carefully on the cooling rack. The crust was golden edges, slightly darker, just as she liked them. The scent intensified, deep, nostalgic, real. But the kitchen stayed empty. Later, Sarah came down and noticed the pie. "Oh, you baked again," she said. "That's sweet, Mum. Just so you know, we already ordered a French butter tart for Christmas Eve. David thinks it pairs better with the wine." She didn't wait for a reply before heading back upstairs. Maria stood in silence, the pie untouched. She began to clean the counter when her phone buzzed an old ringtone that played a soft piano tune she never changed. She picked it up and saw the name Lily. Her heart lifted unexpectedly. Grandma Lily's voice came through warm and crisp. "Are you okay? I know it's colder than usual this year." Maria smiled faintly. "I'm well, dear. Just finished baking. I thought about you today. I remembered how your pie used to make the house smell like magic." "It still does," Maria replied, glancing at the cooling rack. A pause. Then Lily spoke again, her tone gentle but firm. "If you don't mind, I'd like to spend Christmas with you this year. Not at Mum and Dad's. Just with you." Maria sat down, slowly, eyes drifting to the window where the sky had begun to turn pale blue-grey. Her hand reached for the edge of the table, steadying the quiet hope rising in her chest. She looked over at the oven. The apple pie sat whole, untouched, glowing softly in the dim light. And with a breath that was almost a whisper, she said, "I'll wait for you." Maria looked at the oven, the apple pie still whole, and whispered, "I'll wait for you. Merry Christmas," Sarah said. But no one looked Maria in the eyes when she spoke the words. The house shimmered in warm light. Tiny gold bulbs twisted around the banister, and the tree stood tall in the corner of the living room, its ornaments perfectly placed. Holiday jazz played softly through hidden speakers. Glasses, clinked coats were draped over chairs, and laughter ebbed and flowed like background music. Maria stood near the kitchen, the only guest without a drink in her hand. She had ironed her blouse that morning, brushed her hair, and chosen the pearl necklace she rarely wore, her husband's last gift, the one that never lost its quiet sheen. Sarah passed by, flashing a rehearsed smile. "Oh, Mom, you're here? Perfect. Could you watch the oven for the roast? I need to greet the Chen family." Maria nodded. From the edge of the dining room, she watched as guests filled the seats at the main table. Her place card was absent. Instead, a stool had been set near the pantry, with a plate of finger food and plastic utensils. Someone handed out gift boxes wrapped in silver and red. Wine perfumes, cufflinks, tech gadgets. Maria watched, smiling faintly until it became clear there was none for her. Sarah caught her gaze. "Mum, you already have everything you need. Besides, at your age, what more could you want?" Her voice was sweet, her tone final. Maria said nothing. David raised a glass. "Thank you, everyone, for coming. This year's been full of challenges, but thanks to my wife, our partners, and our amazing team, we made it through." There was a round of applause. He did not mention his mother. Later, when the roast was carved and plates were cleared, Sarah approached Maria with a feigned softness. "Have you ever thought about moving somewhere with more care? A facility, maybe. It's not what it used to be. They're very comfortable now." Maria tilted her head, her face unreadable. "You mean a nursing home? It's just, we want what's best. And well, space is tight. Lily's getting older, and she could use the guest room for studying." "I see," Maria said, her voice dry as parchment, the last of the guests left by 10. David walked them to the door, lingering with handshakes. When he came back, Maria had already gathered her things to return to her room. "Mum," he began, not meeting her eyes. "I think it's time we establish some boundaries. You know, for everyone's comfort." He reached the stairs before her. With one smooth motion, he pulled the door to the upper level shut and slid the latch. She heard the soft click. Maria turned back, her spine straightening like winter branches in the wind. No protest left her lips. No tear welled in her eyes. She walked down the hall and into her small room, the one with the old desk and thin curtains. She turned on the lamp, pulled the chair close, and opened her journal. She uncapped her pen with care and wrote, "From now on, I will be the one holding the key." Maria sat alone in her room, writing in her journal, "From now on, I will be the one holding the key." When the doorbell rang, Maria knew it wasn't just a visit. It was the kind of chime that pierced through routine, the kind that carried meaning. She had been sitting in the kitchen, fingers wrapped around a cold cup of tea, the same way she'd done the morning before, and the one before that. But this sound, this one was different. Outside, rain whispered against the windows. Soft, persistent. The sky was draped in grey. Maria stood slowly, steadied herself against the chair, and moved toward the door. Her heart ticked quietly beneath her sweater. When she opened it, the air rushed in crisp and damp. And there stood Lily, her granddaughter. Eyes bright, despite the mist. A small suitcase by her feet, and wrapped around her shoulders, was the old burgundy scarf Maria had knitted 5 winters ago. "Hi, Grandma," Lily said. Maria didn't speak. She stepped forward and hugged her. Not briefly, not politely, but fully, her hands gripping the back of Lily's coat as if anchoring herself. Lily didn't pull away. Inside, the warmth seemed to rise a few degrees. The scent of apple and cinnamon clung faintly in the air. The tin box, with the untouched pie, still sat near the window. Sarah appeared in the hallway, surprised. "Lily, you didn't tell us you were coming." "I know," Lily said, slipping out of her wet shoes. "I wanted to see Grandma." Maria led her into the sitting room, away from the noise of television murmurs and David's distant phone call. The two sat close, as if the world outside had been paused for them alone. "Why didn't you eat the pie?" Lily asked, brushing a crumb from the edge of the tin. "I was waiting," Maria said simply. They spoke of old holidays, about Lily's dorm room and professors. Then Lily's gaze wandered to the shelf where old photo albums sat in fading leather covers. One rested atop a spiral notebook, its corners curled with time. "Can I look through these?" Lily asked. Maria nodded. They flipped through pages filled with birthdays, tree-trimming evenings, and moments no one else remembered. Maria offered quiet recollections, who took the picture what year David had lost his first tooth, the way her late husband used to hum while untangling lights. But one thing she didn't mention: the conversation at the cafe, the decision she had made. Later, as Lily rummaged for a pen in the drawer beside the tin box, something fell with a soft thud. A small USB drive taped discreetly to the underside of the lid. "What's this?" Lily asked, lifting it between two fingers. Maria's breath caught for a moment. "It's nothing urgent," she said, reaching to take it. But Lily didn't move. She looked at her grandmother with the calm certainty that belonged to someone who saw more than she was told. "I won't judge. And I won't ask you to explain everything," she said. "But you don't have to hide anything from me." Maria held her gaze. In Lily's face, she saw a mixture of her son's stubbornness and her husband's steady kindness. But more than that, she saw trust. "I didn't want to pull you into this," Maria said softly. "But perhaps you're the only one who might truly understand." Maria replied, "I didn't want to pull you into this, but perhaps you're the only one who might truly understand." "Why is this land map tucked inside a cookbook?" Lily asked, holding the creased sheet between her fingers. Maria looked up from the pile of worn recipe books spread across the kitchen table. Afternoon light filtered through the narrow window, casting soft, muted stripes across the counter. The kettle hummed faintly in the background, waiting to boil, but never quite loud enough to intrude. She reached out, took the map gently, and smoothed its fold with the flat of her palm. "That's the plot out west. It belonged to my aunt. She left it to me when she passed." Lily sat down, curiosity flickering behind her calm eyes. "Is this the same land Uncle David mentioned last year?" "The one near the new shopping development," Maria nodded slowly. "Yes. He wanted me to sign a power of attorney, said he'd help manage it better." "I didn't sign. I kept the original, just tucked it away." There was no anger in her voice, only a steady undertone of memory. Lily looked back at the cookbook, banana walnut bread page marked with flour fingerprints. "They think I forget things," Maria said, stacking the books again, "but I've forgotten nothing." A soft knock at the door interrupted them. It was Linda, the neighbor, holding a small notepad wrapped with twine. "I found this cleaning my shelves." "You lent it to me, your old holiday recipes," she smiled. Maria welcomed her in. The warmth of shared years passed briefly between them like a breeze. "I saw David last week," Linda added as she handed the book over. "He was pacing outside on the phone. Something about needing funds by the end of the quarter. Sounded urgent." Maria's smile didn't shift. "They forget," she murmured, "being old doesn't mean being blind." Linda chuckled and touched her shoulder. "You always were sharper than you let on." When Linda left, the quiet resumed, but not uncomfortably. Maria walked to a drawer beneath the stove and retrieved a thick envelope. Inside were several folded documents, each worn but neatly arranged. She spread them before Lily: a property appraisal, a lawyer's letter, the unsigned power of attorney, and on top, a draft of her new will. I've kept every piece she said like memories, and because one day someone would need to see the truth. Lily picked up the will, scanning the lines slowly. Her eyes paused at a particular section. You really chose the Rosewood Foundation? She asked quietly. Not, not any of them. Maria looked at her granddaughter. Her voice was clear without defense. I chose what remembers people who are kind, and who are still kind. Sometimes family is a matter of blood, but sometimes it's a matter of choice. Lily looked into the new will her first time seeing it and asked, You really chose the Rosewood Foundation instead of the family Dear David? She wrote the words slowly, not as an accusation nor a plea, just as a statement. No question marks, no ellipses, only quiet certainty pressed into ink. The house was still. Past midnight, the fireplace had cooled to grey ash, and the faint hum of the refrigerator was the only sound that remained. The golden light from the kitchen spilled dimly into the living room, where Maria sat at the old oak desk, a wool shawl draped over her shoulders. Lily had gone to bed earlier, tired from the day of sorting old recipes and listening more than speaking. Maria waited until the last lamp upstairs was switched off before taking out the ivory paper folded in halves and began writing. She started not with facts, but with memory. You used to call me your hero, the letter said. When you had a fever at 5, I sat by your side through the night. You whispered, Don't go, Mom. And I didn't. Her handwriting, though firm, trembled at the curves of certain letters like a breath held too long. I remember the way your fingers clung to mine when you were nervous on the first day of school. I remember your terrible attempt at making scrambled eggs on Mother's Day when you were 10. Maria paused, then continued. I do not blame you, David. I simply remember. She didn't mention the house, or the land, or the will. Instead, she wrote, Value doesn't live in documents or deeds. It lives in how we look at each other when no one is watching. It lives in whether we say thank you to the person who taught us how to tie our shoes. When the letter was finished, Maria didn't fold it right away. She sat for several minutes, her hands resting flat on either side of the paper, her eyes closed. Then, with slow care, she slipped the letter into an unsealed envelope and placed it in the drawer beneath the family portrait on the bookshelf. It was where David kept old warranty slips and spare keys, a drawer he opened often but never truly looked into. The next morning, the sound of rustling paper interrupted the quiet breakfast. David stood near the shelf, holding the letter, reading in silence. His face was unreadable, his jaw tight. Maria didn't look up from her tea. Sarah passed behind him, catching sight of the envelope in his hand. Anything important? She asked, arching a brow. He didn't answer. Instead, his eyes lingered on the delicate pearl necklace at Maria's throat, one he hadn't seen her wear in years. Upstairs, Lily stepped softly onto the landing, sensing something had shifted. But no words were spoken. Later that morning, while watering the wilted potted fern by the window, Maria turned to Lily and smiled gently. They will know, she said, even if no one says it aloud. Maria smiled gently at Lily. They will know, even if no one says it aloud. Who left your scarf out on the porch? Lily asked, frowning, as she lifted the damp, crumpled bundle from the back patio chair. Maria looked up from the dish towel she was folding. The morning fog had crept in thick and wet, wrapping the backyard in a dull, white veil. She reached for the scarf, her fingers brushing over the soaked yarn as she took it from Lily's hands. People forget things that can't be bought, she said softly, her voice nearly lost in the hush of the hour. The scarf was a muted red knitted decades ago with thick wool and uneven stitches. Maria remembered making it for David when he was 12. He had worn it every day that winter, his nose red from the cold, but always tucked behind its warmth. It had survived snowball fights, spilled cocoa, and late bus rides home. Now it lay heavy with moisture, smelling faintly of mildew and forgotten affection. She didn't ask who had left it outside. She didn't need to. Quietly, she laid the scarf over the heater vent near the laundry room and began patting it dry with a clean towel. Lily watched her, her eyes scanning every movement, but she said nothing. Footsteps clipped along the hallway. Sarah passed through, holding a phone to her ear and a ceramic mug in hand. "Oh, that old thing," she said, glancing at the scarf. "I thought it was one of the rags for the dog." "You still keep it?" Before Maria could respond, Sarah added brightly for the call, "Yes, we'll transfer the funds before year-end. David is checking with the broker, hang on a sec." Then, lowering her voice to Lily, she smiled thinly. "Don't catch a chill, sweetie. This fog's awful." She walked off before either of them could reply. Lily turned to Maria, her brow furrowed. "Does she even know it's not hers?" Maria simply smiled, taking the scarf, now slightly warmer from the heater, and folding it along the grain of its stitches. There was no need to explain. After a long pause, Maria opened the wooden chest in the hallway, an old storage box she rarely touched. Inside were small bundles wrapped in linen and lavender paper. At the very bottom, beneath some yarn and yellowed photographs, she found the small velvet pouch. She opened it, revealing the pearl necklace, the one she hadn't worn since Christmas Eve. Holding it in both hands, she laid it gently atop the folded scarf. "There are things," she murmured, "that were once cherished, then forgotten." Her words weren't bitter. They held the acceptance of someone who had learned that memory is its own form of possession. As she closed the chest, Lily noticed a slim brown envelope tucked beneath the scarf's folds. She reached in carefully and pulled it free. The front was labelled in neat cursive to the Rosewood office, open on December 31st. Lily held it for a moment, then looked up at Maria. Maria gave a small nod. "Not yet," she said. "But soon." Lily saw a bundle of old letters tucked inside the scarf box, one marked, "To the Rosewood office. Open on December 31st. "Why is your medical file inside the property documents?" Lily's voice broke the stillness like a dropped spoon. Maria looked up slowly. They were in the attic, where old boxes of paperwork rested beneath a slanted roof dusted with cobwebs. It was late in the afternoon on December 28th, and the pale sunlight filtered through the small circular window like a single watchful eye. The attic had always smelled of dry paper and cedar. Maria hadn't climbed these stairs in years. Lily knelt beside an old plastic box marked "House Deeds and Misc." She gently pulled out a yellowing folder, flipping through it, until her fingers stopped on a sheet with her grandmother's name. But it wasn't just any sheet. "This is your health card, Nana," she said. "But the address registered here, this is the place Dad uses for that rental unit, right?" Maria took the paper and traced her name with one finger. A quiet sigh escaped her lips, but she didn't look surprised. "They once asked me to sign something. They said it was to keep my medical info up to date. I didn't ask questions." Lily sat back the folder still in her lap. "Why would your health file be linked to a rental address unless—" Maria didn't answer. Her silence was steady, measured like someone who had seen the edge of truth before, but waited for someone else to name it aloud. Just then, footsteps echoed from the stairwell. Sarah's voice floated up before her face did. "What are you two doing up here?" she asked, with a saccharine smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It's dusty, and the insulation's not great. We're just digging for old photos of Dad." Lily replied sweetly, slipping the papers behind her back as smoothly as a magician. Sarah took another step in, but didn't cross the floorboards. Her eyes darted from Lily to Maria, as if sensing a ripple in the still air. "Well," she said, brushing her sleeve, "don't get lost in all that old junk. If you need anything, I'll be downstairs." She lingered half a second too long, before turning and walking back down her heels, clicking in retreat. When her steps faded, Lily pulled a portable scanner from her tote bag and whispered, "Just in case. I have a classmate in pre-law. I'll ask what this might mean hypothetically." Maria smiled faintly, but her eyes were firm. "You're careful." "That's good." Lily pressed the scan button, feeding the paper through as quietly as possible. "Do you think they used it for some kind of benefit?" she asked. Maria's reply was calm. "They used my name, not my knowledge." There was no anger in her voice, only the dull weight of something deeply understood. As they packed up the documents, Lily's phone lit up. She stepped to the far corner of the attic and answered in a hushed tone. Maria heard only murmurs. "Yes, I found it." No, she didn't resist. "But we need to be subtle." Below, near the base of the stairs, Sarah paused. Her hand gripped the banister, her jaw tight. She had heard Lily's voice, but not the words, and that silence said more than it should. Sarah heard Lily on the phone, but couldn't make out the words. She walked back down with a face that had hardened. No one called Maria to the table, yet she laid out the linen napkin, placed her utensils with care, and sat down in the same corner she always did. The dining room glowed in warm golden light. Candles flickered atop a long oak table, laden with dishes that smelled of rosemary, garlic, and indulgence. The family bustled with soft laughter and clinking glasses. Their voices mingled in pleasantries and compliments for Sarah's roast lamb. But Maria's place, as always, was apart, not exiled, not dismissed, just omitted. She wore the plum-coloured wool dress she once kept for special occasions. Tonight, it clung gently to her thin shoulders, carrying with it the memory of many winters. Her silver hair was combed back neatly. Her lips held no smile, but no sadness either. Across the table, Sarah raised her glass, all beaming charm. "To a fresh start, everyone, may the new year bring light and prosperity." Glasses chimed. David nodded, the corners of his mouth tight, avoiding Maria's gaze. Lily, seated beside her grandmother, leaned in slightly and poured a touch of wine into Maria's glass. "Are you ready?" she asked, her voice barely above a breath. Maria didn't answer. Instead, she reached into the small clutch on her lap and withdrew a cream-coloured envelope. With deliberate calm, she placed it on the table, sliding it until it stopped before David. The room quieted, though no one acknowledged it. "This," Maria said, her voice clear and even, "is an invitation from the Rosewood Foundation. Tomorrow morning, I'll be awarded an honorary certificate for contributing to something that still holds worth." The envelope sat untouched. David's eyes flickered to it. Sarah's hand slipped, and her wineglass tumbled to the floor with a sharp crack red, spilling across the tiles like a spreading stain. No one moved to clean it. No one spoke. Maria rose, slowly adjusting the sleeve of her dress. Her hands didn't tremble. "I believe the apple pie is still warm," she said. "I should check on it." She stepped away from the table, the soft click of her heels muffled by the rug, leaving a silence that pressed into everyone's skin like cold mist. Sarah dropped her wineglass. No one said a word. Maria stood and said, "I think the apple pie is still in the oven." When the announcer read aloud the name, Maria L. Dawson, only one person rose from her seat, Lily. Maria took a breath light, but certain, and stood in the aisle of the Rosewood Foundation's community hall. Her plum-colored wool dress, worn for the very first time, caught the warm midday light filtering through the stained glass windows. It hugged her figure, not with vanity, but with memory. She walked slowly without assistance, though Lily was near behind her. The hall was modest. A few rows of folding chairs held seniors wrapped in scarves and gloves, a handful of volunteers in white vests, and a local journalist with a notepad balanced on her lap. Up front, a podium framed by paper snowflakes and a banner that read, "Honoring Quiet Legacies." Maria reached the podium. The applause was gentle, respectful. No thunder, just sincerity. A short video played on the projector a montage of children playing at the community center, elders receiving winter coats, and the faded logo of rosewood glowing in soft pastels. A voiceover noted, "Thanks to Mrs. Dawson's generous bequest, over 60 families will begin the new year with warmth and hope." Lily dabbed at her eyes. Maria did not cry. She pressed one hand to her forehead, bowed slightly, and stepped back. The MC, a young woman in a navy blazer, smiled warmly. She asked for no speech, no spotlight, she said to the crowd, but we cannot overlook what it means when someone chooses to give, not for recognition, but for reason. She paused, then added, "A mother," and a quiet force of grace. More claps, a few camera clicks. In the second row, Lily held Maria's hand. The girl's knuckles trembled. Maria squeezed gently, no reassurance, just connection. Outside, the wind picked up. Maria declined the offer of a car ride, insisting instead on walking through the side garden of the foundation. Her shoes tapped against the stone path as she passed the low hedges she once donated to have planted. A volunteer waved from inside the glass doors. Later that evening in the Dawson house, silence lingered until Sarah broke it with a rustle of newspaper. Maria Dawson, a woman who spent her final years on the unexpected. She read aloud, her tone tight. The paper crinkled between her fingers. David sat on the sofa, unmoving. Sarah turned toward him. "We were wrong. But now who's going to believe anything we say?" David didn't answer. He only stared at the headline, then at the framed photo still hanging crooked on the wall. Sarah held the newspaper in her hands and said to David, "We were wrong, but now, who's going to believe anything we say? I'm Linda. I know I shouldn't be meddling, but there's something I need to say." The phone rang just after sunrise, as the first light crept into the quiet kitchen. Maria had already tied her apron hands, dusted with flour, kneading dough, in the gentle rhythm of familiarity. The scent of cinnamon and apples curled through the air. Lily, still in her robe, answered the phone. Maria paused only for a second, just long enough to hear the name, then resumed working, though her ears were keen. Linda's voice came through faintly on the line, cautious but determined. "I've kept quiet too long," she said. "But I found out Sarah used your grandmother's documents to apply for a line of credit mortgaged against property that wasn't hers. The bank has the papers. I saw them. I can testify if needed." Lily's tone remained calm. "Why now?" Linda sighed. "Because I saw how your grandmother was treated. I thought it wasn't my place. But silence is no longer kindness." In the background, Maria gently placed the dough into a tin, covering it with a cloth. She didn't speak, but Lily knew she'd heard. When the call ended, Lily turned. "She's willing to go on record." Maria nodded, wiping her hands. "Let them carry their own weight. I won't add mine." Later that morning, the two walked along the frosted path behind the house, their breath visible in the crisp New Year's air. Lily tucked her scarf tighter around her neck. "People are starting to see," she said softly. "They're realizing you were never weak." Maria smiled faintly. Sometimes letting someone collapse under their own lies is louder than any courtroom. They passed the garden's edge, where old tulip bulbs still slept beneath the earth. Back inside, Maria opened a drawer in her writing desk. She took out a folded sheet and handed it to Lily. "I changed the deed," she said. "The house is now co-owned. Your name is on it?" Lily blinked. "Bah. You don't owe me anything," Maria said. "But I want you to know this place always has room for someone who sees." Maria handed Lily the paper. "I've changed the name on the house deed. It's yours now." Maria stopped in front of the old family portrait. Among all the smiling faces, she was the only one not looking into the lens. The photo had hung in that narrow hallway since the first day she moved into David's house. A silent witness, tucked between the thermostat and a forgotten wall calendar. It had been mentioned once or twice in a fleeting comment from Sarah about redecorating, or when Lily glanced at it as they passed. But today, it demanded attention. Maria stood still. The hall was quiet, except for the soft rustle of Lily folding sweaters into a suitcase behind her. Outside, the pale light of the first day of the new year filtered in through the gauzy curtains. The air smelled faintly of dust and dried pine needles, remnants of a celebration that had never truly included her. She had spent the morning packing, neatly, methodically, no urgency, no grief. Her hands moved with the same rhythm they once used to braid Lily's hair or knead dough for apple pie. Now they sorted shawls, folded letters, placed books into small stacks. Her room was bare, but it did not feel like a loss. She glanced at the photograph again. It had been taken during David's graduation. Sarah had insisted on a professional photographer. Everyone had dressed in shades of blue. David and Sarah were in the center, arms around each other, bright, polished smiles. Lily was off to the side, still a child clutching a stuffed rabbit. And Maria? She stood at the edge, her face turned slightly away, as though she already sensed what was coming. "Ba Van Jiu Tam," Naisao Lily's voice was soft behind her. Maria turned. Her granddaughter stood there with a blouse in one hand, eyes resting on the photo. Maria nodded. It was never about the picture, she said. It was about remembering. Without another word, she reached into the drawer beneath the hallway table. Inside, among spare batteries and old receipts, lay a pair of silver-handled scissors. She picked them up, walked to the frame, and opened the back with delicate fingers. There was no ceremony, no pause for drama, just a quiet snip. One cut, then another. She separated the section where she stood from the rest. Lily took a breath, but didn't speak. From behind them, a shadow appeared, David. He had stepped into the hallway, perhaps to ask something, perhaps by accident. His eyes landed on the torn edges on the still warm scissors in his mother's hand. But he said nothing. His gaze held for a moment, then dropped, and he turned away. Maria didn't follow him with her eyes. Instead, she held up the piece she had kept just her and Lily caught in one sliver of captured time. She handed it to her granddaughter. "Family," she said, "isn't where you're born. It's who chooses you every day." Lily blinked. Her hands closed gently around the photo. On the hallway table, the original frame now stood empty. Only 2 women would return to fill it. Maria didn't return the photo to the wall. Instead, she set it beside the small stack of her belongings on the dresser, just the essentials. A change of clothes, her journals, the recipe book with faded ink, the envelope marked Rosewood, and now the trimmed photograph of her and Lily. She moved slowly, not from weakness, but from certainty. Every fold, every item placed, was a declaration: I am no longer waiting to be included. In the distance, she could hear the faint murmur of David's voice through the wall. A phone call muffled, anxious. Something about refinancing. Something about delays. She had heard those same tones before, when he asked her to sign papers to streamline the process, to make things easier for everyone. Everyone but her. She remembered saying yes too many times. Not because she didn't know better, but because she still held on to a fragile hope that being agreeable might one day mean being accepted. But that morning, she had awakened differently. The silence in the house didn't sting. It clarified. From the living room, the grandfather clock chimed. 11 o'clock. Lily appeared at the doorway holding the suitcase. "It's all packed," she said. Maria nodded, walked over, and gently took Lily's hand. For a moment, they stood like that, grandmother and granddaughter fingers, wrapped not just around luggage handles, but around the invisible thread that had never broken even when everything else had. Then Maria looked at the final item on the dresser, a small ceramic music box. It hadn't played for years. It was a gift from her husband on their 25th anniversary. She opened it. The mechanism stuck, gave a faint click, and then silence. "It doesn't work anymore," Lily said gently. Maria smiled. Neither did this home. She closed the lid. Some things are meant to be remembered, not revived. They walked down the hallway together. The living room was empty. Sarah was nowhere to be seen. A coffee cup sat abandoned on the table, half drunk. Lipstick faint on the rim. David stood at the foot of the stairs. He didn't move as they approached. His eyes flicked to the suitcase, then to the photo Lily held. "You're leaving?" he asked, though his voice carried more confusion than protest. Maria paused. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stepped beside him, close enough that he could hear the quiet clarity in her voice. "I lived here," she said, "but I was never truly invited." David looked down, then said almost mechanically, "You always had your space." Maria nodded. "Yes. Like the broom in the closet, always in reach, rarely appreciated." He didn't respond. She didn't expect him to. As she reached the door, she turned one last time. "The keys are on the table," she said. "But the name on the house, it's not yours. It never was." Outside, the sun had risen just enough to warm the sidewalk. Lily opened the trunk of a small silver car. Maria placed her bag inside, then turned toward the house for a final look. The curtains fluttered in the upstairs window. No one stood behind them. She didn't need them to. She climbed into the passenger seat and waited as Lily started the engine. "Where to?" "First," Lily asked. Maria looked ahead, the road clear. "Anywhere the light reaches," she said, "and where I don't have to lower my voice to be heard." As they drove away, the house behind them stood still, unchanged, unaware, unready. But Maria wasn't leaving broken. She was reclaiming space. And this time, it was hers. "Are you sure you want to keep the old oven?" Lily asked, brushing a speck of dust from her sweater. Maria nodded without hesitation. "Some things need to continue." The small house at the edge of town breathed quietly around them. Light filtered through gingham curtains, and the air smelled faintly of cinnamon and clean wood. It was neither grand nor modern, but it was theirs. Maria moved slowly through the kitchen, placing each utensil in a drawer with deliberate care. The faded recipe book, its spine softened by decades, lay open beside a bowl of apples. She had already peeled and sliced them, her fingers remembering every motion. Lily sat at the small table, a cup of tea in one hand, her journal open in the other. The radio played softly in the background, a string quartet, just enough sound to fill the silence, but never overpower it. "This place feels like it's waiting to be loved," Lily said. Maria smiled. "Then we're the right ones for it." Outside, someone knocked gently. Lily opened the door to find Linda holding a bunch of fresh daisies, her cheeks pink from the morning breeze. "Thought this place could use some color," she said. "And I wanted to say, it's good to see you both here." Maria took the flowers and kissed Linda's cheek. "It's good to be somewhere we belong." As the oven preheated, Maria rolled the dough with steady hands, the same bowl, the same wooden pin. But something inside her had shifted. There was no ache in her shoulders, no tightness in her chest. Just warmth. Lily pulled out a small envelope from the mail pile and held it out. "It's from Dad," she said quietly. Maria paused. "Read it if you want." Lily opened it and read aloud, her voice careful. "If you're happy, that's what matters most. I hope you are." There was no apology, no explanation, just those words. Maria didn't ask to hold the letter. She simply nodded, took it from Lily and slipped it into the drawer marked Read. It wouldn't change anything, but it didn't need to. The timer dinged. The pie was ready. Linda offered to take a picture. Maria and Lily stood side by side near the oven, the scent of apple and cinnamon wrapping around them like a shawl. Linda stepped back, framed the shot, and smiled. "Now this is a real family photo." Maria served the first slice of pie. The crust was golden, the filling warm. She placed the plate in front of Lily and said, "This piece isn't for the most deserving, it's for the one who knows how to love." Lily blinked fast and whispered, "Thank you, Ba." They ate in silence, the kind of silence that says more than words. Later that afternoon, as the sun stretched longer across the windowsill, Lily sat beside Maria with a sketch pad on her lap. "I was thinking," she said, "should we give this house a name?" Maria looked around the worn counters, the chipped teacups, the quiet corners that already felt like echoes of laughter and healing. She turned to Lily and smiled. Second Bloom. The scent of warm apple pie now filled a different home, one chosen, not inherited. Where once Maria sat in silence now, she stood with clarity, no longer waiting for love to be offered, but honoring the dignity she reclaimed on her own terms. Justice may arrive late, but it echoes like the quiet turning of a key, unlocking not revenge, but truth. Sometimes the most powerful legacy is not what we leave behind, but who we become in the face of erasure. Have you ever witnessed injustice that went unspoken? Share your thoughts below, because your voice might be the one that awakens another. Don't forget to follow Heavy Stories for more tales that demand to be heard.